Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My guest today is holistic lifestyle coach Bill Matthews. Bill, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks, Matt.
Awesome.
Doing
Yeah,
fantastic.
great. We've having a little back and forth. We're both in the enlifted coaching community and both in the sobriety community. So I really want to thank you for coming on and giving your what I'm imagine will be a very unique perspective just on sobriety, life, coaching, personal development. And you want to congratulate you first off. You're coming up on I think you're over 35 years sober at this point. Is that correct?
Yeah, May 20th. May 20th was 35 years, which
Hell yeah.
seems like
Amazing.
yesterday. It seems like yesterday, but yet seems like so long ago. Lots has transpired in 35 years.
35 years. Congrats. So at time of recording, that's like a few days ago. We're recording on May 23rd here today. So congratulations, man. 35 years. That's huge.
Yeah.
It's great.
Uh,
That's great.
yeah, I got sober when I was 21 years old.
Wow. Yeah. Well, let's get into that. I want to jump into it. I mean, we'll circle back to everything else that you have going on here. I've been watching your Instagram feed for the last little bit, especially since we had, set a date for recording this. And I really enjoy what you have going on as far as like the Perspectivest. You'll have like a quote, sort of do the alternate of like a personalized post and then a sort of a quote or a food for thought post. So I really like the way you have your Instagram set up. We'll get into that. Before we do though, I'd love to go back in time as far as you care to go back and just tell us what led you up to, that year 21 years old, where you're just like, hey, this is like, I'd just love to hear more about you and what your life was like before turning 21 and deciding to sober up.
Well, it's interesting because as I look back at when I really started to party, you're thinking 1976. I was 11 years old, uh, and I was handed my first beer. It was a warm can of like Schlitz malt liquor at a party at my own house, and I drank it, and couldn't stop the bed from spinning and all that great stuff. But like, hey, man, I'm gonna do that again. And up to that point, I had never done anything. You would think, well, that's right. An 11-year-old shouldn't have been doing any of that. But believe it or not, the summer of that same year, my older brother gave me a little tab of paper,
Uh,
and he said, "Hey, you should put this on your tongue." And I'm like, "It's only a little tab. What could this do?" Well, the next 10 years of my life was an actual trip. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And, I never thought I had a problem. I was just partying. As the progression of drugs and alcohol, I became the type of person that would take a handful of something and then ask what it was. And they're like, dude, that's the most we've seen anybody take. Alcohol was my go-to, my standby, I was really involved in sports, but as you become that guy that starts doing drugs and alcohol, those people that I grew up with slowly just started fading away. Um, and I started hanging out with the people that were, long hair, concert shirt wearing stoner guys, the guys that I would have never associated with. But up literally, Matt, up until I got sober, I really thought I'm just partying, man. I'm just a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
just having a good time. And, I'm certainly not an alcoholic because an alcoholic wears a trench coat, stashes a bottle of vodka in his coat, can't keep his shit together. He's got a little puke on his jacket and he lives on the street. I'm just a kid having a good time. Meanwhile, arrested for, breaking into the school, vandalism, just numerous little things. And as I look back, like most of us in recovery can say, those all happened while I was under the influence of something. And though I had great, people in the family was trying to help me, I just leave me alone. I'm fine. You're my problem. I'm just having a good time. And I mean, I met the mother of my kid when I was 16. She was 18. By the time I turned 18, and I turned 18 in October, my daughter was born in December. So I'm 18 years old and I have this baby girl, and and I'm still just I'm just a wreck. I mean, certainly not in any position to have a child and bring a child into this life. we tried to make it work for a while. And then we, in the 80s, that's when the crack epidemic was happening, and it was in my neighborhood. I'd never touched that, but oh, my gosh, it's why they call that stuff freebase. You might as well take everything you own, put it in a big pile, and light it on fire, because you're going to lose everything. And that's exactly what I did. Mother, my kid, my just everything. When I got sober, I'm 6'4". When I got sober, I weighed 135 pounds. And and the teeth I have in my mouth right now are not all my own. You know what I mean? Just did not take care of myself, was just living a fantasy that I was just having a good time. You know, what really is a good time? I certainly didn't decide to get sober.
Interesting.
The universe decided it was time for me to get sober. I mean, in 1983, my brother died of alcoholism. 32 years old. He died on Christmas Day, alone in a hotel room, of cirrhosis of the liver.
Oof.
You would think that's we might have this running in our family, and maybe you need to do something. Parents were bar owners. My whole life, mom and dad owned a bar. Mom ran the bar. Dad worked at a job. They were not home all the time because they were running businesses. And when dad was home or coming home, you just didn't know what was gonna happen. My childhood was a bit of a mess compared to the neighbors, right? To me, it was the only normal life I knew. In retrospect, it gave me a great opportunity to learn to be self-sufficient, and to learn how to take care of myself, right? So there's benefits to it as well. I had a lot of freedom, I can tell you that, compared to the kids that we see today, or even my own children, because I have a son as well. So
nice. Yeah.
I mean, that's the journey that got me towards getting sober. Now, what really triggered the event is that I decided I was up for a couple of days, and I looked like I was losing all circulation in my arms. And I told my mom, I really need to go to the hospital. And she says, no, what you really need to do is go to bed. You need to get some sleep. And I took her up on that, and I went to sleep, and I must have slept for a full day. And she says, you really need to go and stay with your brother. She encouraged me to go up north to San Francisco, where my brother lives. And he's married, got a couple kids. When I got there, he was doing more cocaine than I'd ever seen in my life. It's like, wow, I just left from one bad spot to another, but yet I stayed and tried to make it work for about 6 months. And then one night we were out partying, and we got into a verbal altercation, me and my oldest brother. And I decided, I'm freaking out of here. And I went back home to the house, gathered my stuff, and decided to drive home. Well, somewhere between San Francisco and LA, cocaine wore off, alcohol was still in my system, and I wrecked my car on the freeway. And luckily, I just broke my nose. No major damage, but that's the first time I ever swore I'm never drinking again. It was the only time I really remembered I'm done. I remember saying, hey, I'm not going to drink at work, or I'm not going to do this, and these little games that you play. But to say I'm not ever going to drink again, that never was even a notion. I got a drunk driving 1 week later.
Wow.
So I'm, 20 years old or 21 years old. I had just turned 21. So I was legally drinking in a bar, left, ran a red light, stopped for a stop sign. So the cop figured there's an issue here. Pulled me over. Of course, I'm in mom's car. I got a bag of dope in my pocket. I stuff it in between the seats. They don't find it, but I get arrested.
Yeah.
And I got sentenced to like 120 days in county jail. And compared to others, it's not a long time, but for me, it's like the most I'd ever done is 30 days.
Yeah.
And some guys told me, hey, you should go to this place called Acton Rehab because, man, there's golfing, fishing, women. They just described it as this beautiful place. I'm like, I don't know rehab from what. I don't even put that all together. That's how out of it I am. I just know that I don't have to spend the whole time in jail, that I get to go to this resort.
Right. Right.
So I spend 30 days in jail. Some guy picks me up in a van, drives around, picks up a few more shady characters. I'm not shady. They are shady.
Sure.
Meanwhile, here I am sucked up. Look, just terrible.
Yeah.
And I land in this place and people are coming to greet me. I'm like, man, I have reached a level of lameness I didn't know existed. It's like these people are all like, I'm like, it's like a cult. It's a very strange feeling. They got
Mm.
these chips and these coins hanging from these keychains and they're want to hug me. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm not really into that. I don't really know what's happening.
Yeah.
And I went to my first 12-step meeting.
Mm.
And they described what an alcoholic is. They were reading the doctor's opinion, and they said that it's an allergy, an obsession coupled with an allergy. And when you're not drinking, all you're doing is thinking about drinking. And when you start drinking, you don't know when you're going to stop. And I was like, oh shit, I'm an alcoholic.
Mm.
Like, I
Yeah.
wish I could unhear that, because I don't, that's not 6 months after my 21st birthday what I really want to admit to myself.
Yeah.
But I did, and I understood by looking back at all these things that have happened in my life that um, alcohol has been a major problem. But the funny thing is, I was like, I'll quit drinking, but I ain't gonna quit smoking weed. you know, I never got in no trouble smoking weed, man. Weed relaxes me. You know,
Right.
I don't know anybody that doesn't do nothing. It doesn't, that sounds boring. And then after staying in there for a little while, I made the decision, hey man, I I have a problem with drugs and alcohol, and it
Mm.
has ruined my life.
Mhm.
Why not give this thing a shot? And that was literally the beginning of my journey. May 20th, 1988 was my first complete day of sobriety while I was in jail. I got
Wow.
sent to jail, which is a bad place to wake up for your first day sober.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be. Yeah, yeah. Bad or good if you look at it in the context of the story, right? And what has set you off in that journey, right? So it depends on your perspective or your where you are in the time continuum. Thanks for sharing that story, man. That's ooh, yeah, it's powerful stuff. And I can imagine like the version of you from back then, like you mentioned, 6 months after turning 21, legally allowed to drink. You'd had this 10-year run essentially of partying, right? And then having to come to terms with that so early on like that. I mean, that's tough for anybody to come with, especially when there's somebody that's, you've been waiting. You'd probably have that date circled on your calendar for a while, right? Turning 21, here we go. Let's do this. So yeah, there's lots on there that lots of different little subjects we can dive into there, isn't there? I know that it's a big part of you and what you talk about now, the work that you're doing, talking about like the victim mentality, projections is a big of the stories we tell ourselves, it comes up in our lifted training, of course, right? So, how is the victim mentality showing up for you, back in those days? I'd like to really like the way that you take responsibility for your life now and have been for these past 35 years versus, that young version of you at age 20, where you already in your story, you had a couple projections there saying, it's not me, it's you. Like you're talking to your parents or whoever it may be. So has that been, yeah, how's that shown up for you? Like just the dealing and navigating, projections and the victim mentality. Is that sort of a practice thing over these last 35 years, or is it fairly new for you? Or just, yeah, a little bit more about that, please.
The really interesting thing is about the 12 steps is the fourth step, made a moral inventory of myself, right? And then you write these three columns. I'm mad, I have resentment against this person. This is why I'm resentful at them, and this is what it affects. And that's as far as most people ever get, right? I got a list of a bunch of people that I don't like. And if it wasn't for them, my freaking life would be amazing. Like, so up until sobriety, I am the victim. I'm a victim of a father that was born in 1928. The only reason I know he loves me is because he doesn't kick me out of the house. I'm lucky to be there. He's violent with mom. I'm a victim of this dysfunctional family. How come we can't be like the Trouts across the street? I don't get what I want for Christmas. My life is just horrible. I'm born in the wrong time. My family's a mess, and brother, all that. But when you really write that stuff down, and if you go to the most important part of it is putting out of the minds, all of that stuff, what they did to you, what part, if any, did you play? You set the ball in motion, and they were just retaliating. So you begin to take a way different perspective of, wow, I wasn't an innocent bystander in my life. I took actions, selfish, self-centered, egotistic. Where's mine? Right? And they were retaliating. Now, that doesn't mean that I wasn't the victim of some horrible shit. A lot of young boys are affected by stuff. Well, how do you deal with that? I am the victim of that. Well, yeah, but that's not continuing to happen.
Right.
How do you learn to let that go? Right. So, large part of my process of recovery was getting rid of that victim mentality. It's like, I am the owner of my life. What part do I play, and what part do I want to play now? The interesting thing is, when we talk in Lifted, it's the 4-step method, which is something I talked to Mark about. It. Isn't that interesting? In the 12-step program, it's the 4-step.
Yeah.
And in Lifted, it's a 4-step process.
That's a good point.
The interesting thing is I am now taking men that are in recovery. I know you did that 4-step. Have you ever wrote the whole story down? Because there's a lot of stuff in that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I choose to not look to live to be a victim today. If it's Matt's fault that I'm at my job, or I'm being whatever it might be, if it's their fault, there's no action I don't have to take any action because I'm just a victim.
Totally. 100%.
But when you really look at it, am I really the victim, or am I choosing to stay in a spot that I shouldn't? I have power. When you look at the program, we're only powerless over one thing. The book only says we're powerless over alcohol. Hey guys, you're not powerless over your life. We see the 12 steps. People live in this powerless mentality. Oh, I'm an alcoholic. That's just the way it is.
Right.
And my alcoholic thinking, like what? And I get the disassembling of the ego when you first come into the program.
Totally. Yeah.
I'm an alcoholic. My life is unmanageable. That's the fact. But the goal is to recover. This is how the first 100 of us recovered.
Yes.
So when I share and talk to men that I help, hey, how about if you broke your arm? Do you want to be recovering from a broken arm for 13 years?
Yeah, great analogy. Yeah.
Don't you want to heal that darn thing? I didn't come in here to be sick for the rest of my life. I came in here to recover and have a life beyond my wildest dreams as a result, and then teach other people how to do it. And the Lifted method is just an extension. And I have a few guys that are open-minded enough to go a little bit further in their stories.
Yeah.
You do the little Billy story to a guy in the program, they have that same voice we've been dealing with our whole lives. They all have it. That 4-step work didn't get rid of that voice. So it's been an interesting development this last couple years, adding the Lifted method. I mean, I had started a more spiritual journey prior to that, and you start talking about the 4 Agreement, just different books, just opening my mind to other things.
Definitely. And again, the number 4, I love that book as well, the 4 Agreements. funny, eh? The numerology, the fours apparently are showing up,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great book. And I want to get into that. Right before we started recording, we were talking about how you sort of evolved or expanded beyond some of the, and again, and it's always worth mentioning. And from my perspective on AA is like, it saved my life, and it was exactly what I needed at that point in time in my life. And there is still room for it. And I still do go to AA meetings, much less than I did in that first 8 months of sobriety. And I'm still going. So through that somewhat binary, very structured, very rigid design that I did need with AA, somewhere along the line, I started to get much more curious about what else was out there through, like you're mentioning, books, Wayne Dyer, different artists and authors came into my life at the right time, and you had a great quote as far as something that literally came out of the big book that really jumped out at you one day and really changed your perspective, that along with the relationship with your wife. So I'd love it if you would, I could recount that story that we were talking about before we got started, please.
Well, the story starts because, like I said, my wife has always been what I used to call woo-woo, which is a very negative thing because that means you're already dismissing the reality of it. And she's been Reiki master, and then she went to Sedona to see the vortexes. I'm like, yeah, go do your little girl out, your little retreat.
Yeah.
I'll be here doing what normal people do. And she came back and said she wanted to study metaphysics. And she really delved into meditation, and I'm seeing her out in the backyard for half an hour, and I'm like, wow, and I remembered a part in the book that says that there's nothing that leaves a man in everlasting ignorance more than contempt prior to investigation. Ooh. Which means I'm deeming something untrue before I even find out if it's untrue. I'm just labeled it because that's somebody else told me that, like, oh, that's no good, that's nonsense. Mm-hmm. When I started to really, what is meditation? Because we have this thought that it's this guy with his fingers and quiet the mind, and we have, most people have a misconception of what meditation is. So I downloaded, the Insight Timer, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a little beginning course on meditation, and I began to understand, like, whoa, it's not about eliminating thoughts; it's about becoming aware of those thoughts. And one of the first books I read was by Aubrey Marcus, and it was Own the Day. Mm-hmm. About cold showers and drinking water in the morning, these little things, right? And then a book that really changed my perspective was Michael Singer's Untethered Soul.
Yeah, ooh, such a good book. I love that book.
Yeah. The biggest thing was the roommate. Like, what?
Yeah,
that's his version of the Little Billy story, right?
Yeah. Good point.
The voice in your head, and to teach us that you are not the voice, you are the one watching the voice. It's like, wow, it's just, I never even thought about it. And if you could take that voice out of your head and set it on the couch, you'd kick him out, right? Mm-hmm. So having an open mind, and now I was never a reader unless it had something to do with basketball when I was a kid or whatever. However, I remember in my deep addiction, I picked up two books. One was called Cry Anger, and the other one was The Power of Self-Esteem or Positive Thinking. Mm-hmm. I'm drinking 12 packs, reading these books, wondering why they're not working. But
yeah,
in 2018, I believe, I heard Hal Elrod on a podcast. He wrote a book called The Miracle Morning. Mm-hmm. And it's basically about doing, these 4 or 5 things every morning: reading, writing, meditating, exercising, visualizing. Mm-hmm. And that's when I just started gathering books. I just started reading. So obviously the 4 agreements is one that I picked up really, really quick. And then, you have Man's Search for Meaning. I could go on because now I'm just an avid reader. I just love reading. Yeah. And now beginning to take reading as a form of meditation. And it's something I wrote about the other day. Is like, how often do I catch myself reading but yet I'm thinking about what I'm going to do after work or this week,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yet I'm still reading. And then so I've taught myself, okay, stop,
Yeah.
go back to where you left off last
Yeah. Right.
and
Yeah.
start again and
Again.
practice being present.
Mm,
So it becomes a form of meditation.
I love that. That's
Yeah.
a yeah, that's a great perspective on it. I find I do that with reading. I mean, I used to like I remembered when I was a kid, I would read books a lot more, and I would have instances where that would happen where I would jump around because I was thinking about, like you mentioned, something that was going to happen in the future, something that happened to me during the day. But I found as I got older, I definitely was having these big gap out moments where I'd be reading, quote unquote. My eyes would be doing the mechanics of reading, and I'd be just like, man, I didn't retain any of that, So I totally get that. And yeah, I love that. You're the first person that's actually, connected the dots as far as reading and meditation. I love that. That's super cool, man. Thanks for connecting that. Great books as well. Man's Search for Meaning. I read that one or listen to it at least once a year. Amazing book. Untethered Mind, amazing book. Yeah, for sure. I'm sure if we compared our book lists, there'd be probably a lot of overlap there.
Sure. Sure.
I wanted to get into just the idea of like perspective, right? Like you've had two different, pretty common like perspectives or like, the stereotypes as far as like the alcoholic with the trench coat, right? You mentioned like the meditator. It's like the guy sitting cross-legged with his doing like the Om and all that. What is about nowadays, like in you have the term the perspectivist is like one of your handles or nicknames, if you will. What has that done for you, and like what does the word perspectivist mean, and how does that change some of these like stereotypes that everybody seems to gravitate towards, that I feel is very much of the same energy that you were talking about, having contempt before like investigating something? Is very much of that, right? So no real question other than perhaps just a topic to lead you on there.
The interesting thing is that I've often said life and what you're dealing with is always a matter of perspective. I get to choose how I want to look at it.
Mm.
You mentioned the word perspectivist. It's not a word. It's like a word I made up,
Right,
right?
right.
And decided to create a quiet, nobody, I mean, people are getting it now that that's even me. Like people would start
Mm.
following me on Instagram. I'm like, hey, thanks for the follow. They're like, yeah, I see you followed this page. It looks great. Like they don't know it's me,
Yeah,
right? So it
right.
was almost like I could sit quietly behind the scenes and just post stuff
Mm.
and not be responsible.
Yeah, right.
That like so I didn't have any fear of it. Like
Mm.
I didn't want to post and have an expectation that it was from me. It was very odd, right?
Yeah.
So then I started copying what I'm posting on the Perspectivist. I started putting it on my regular Instagram. And
Okay.
it used to just be a quote.
Mhm.
So I'm a writer. Every day when I do my morning routine and I read and do my meditation, a thought will come to my mind. I'll write a sentence and then I'll just write a page. And these quotes come from a page of writing. And I'll just pick up something that hits, but I never would post any writing after it. And just recently I started going, hey, just do it. Put yourself out in the universe, man. Just post what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
So that's when I started adding the verbiage after the quote versus just a quick hit. So the Perspectivist is just a reminder, is once again, I'm not a victim of my mind. I have the opportunity to change my perspective whenever I want. If you think about the book I'm reading right now, Clarity, Jamie Smart, little
Mm.
little book of clarity, then clarity. It's about contaminated thinking.
Mm.
Everything goes back to my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter. Like Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. In spite of all that was going on outside, he decided how he was going to feel, meaning that our lives and how we exist is always from the inside out,
Yeah. Yeah.
not
Yeah.
the outside in. If I'm waiting for this to all be good on the outside and then I'll be okay, I'm really missing the boat.
Totally. Yeah.
When this gets better, I'll be happy. No, when you're happy, this is going to get better.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And that's the switch that happens at some point, but it's like for me, it took a while, and I'm still on a leg of my journey where I'm realizing, the process and the journey is what's to be savored and what's to be enjoyed. It's for the longest time very much conditioned into me was, achievements, that hit a dopamine, and like a good addict, just getting used to like, okay, I'm going to be focusing on what's next. I'm not going to be focused on like the moment I'm in is just a vehicle to get to, very similar to like my drinking patterns have shown up in my way of, showing up in my business. Right. And, now I have this awareness about it. I'm like, the alcohol has long since been removed from my life, but I'm still using a lot of these same patterns, to numb myself or avoid certain things. So yeah, I'm curious, like, is there any other patterns that you've found in your life, that you were kind of like, oh damn, that's still around? And you know what I mean? It's like, I imagine you're still view yourself as a work in progress, very much getting a lifelong learner vibe from you. So are there still these like variants or variations of patterns that you're just like, oh crap, that I am still doing that, but it's just like a more elaborate or a clever way of this pattern to show up in your life?
I mean, something that's relevant to me now is just allowing myself to be my authentic self now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would rather be loved for who I am than loved for who I'm not.
Yeah.
And I've kept my mouth shut for years, worried about what they were going to think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how about if we flip that and they should worry about what I think?
Right. Ooh, I love that.
I mean, my goal now is to evoke change in other people, at least stimulate a conversation. Why are we all just living in this normal box? It's like, I want to bring I went out to dinner with a couple friends for my 35th year. I brought them each the book, the little book of clarity.
Mm.
I just had it. I'm just tapping them on the shoulder, like, hey, check this out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that has been something that I'm constantly working on, is to get rid of that imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
to move past that.
Yes.
Because I lived in that for so long. Little Billy was, as I did some story work with Mark, he capitalized on my father. Like, I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome. He's like, hey, let's talk about this. He's got a unique way of zeroing in, like, what
Yeah.
happened with your dad?
Yeah.
And it's like, my dad was violent to my mom.
Mm-hmm.
As a little boy, I couldn't save my mom.
Mm.
So I get it translated throughout my year that I get very uncomfortable around confrontation
Yeah.
and violence. So I would avoid those situations and then feel weak because of it, right? And when
Right.
he pointed that out, it's like, wow, I never even thought about that before, right?
Right. Yeah.
So when I see men that are over masculine, violent, in a, oh, masculinity is awesome, love it,
Mm-hmm.
but also there's the feminine side of all of us as well, and finding harmony between those two. But I
Yeah.
would get very uncomfortable when there was over masculine and violence, although I performed violence on people my own self growing up, getting myself in some bad situations. But it was really interesting when he pointed that out, that I was this helpless young man.
Yeah.
So growing up, it caused me to be afraid to use my voice, to speak up and say, no, that's not right.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not afraid to speak up now.
Mm-hmm.
And not in an aggressive manner, but I have the right to stand up for my space. This is my space. This is my belief. And not everybody's got to agree with us,
Mm-hmm.
right? When I hand somebody a book or make a statement or make a post, it's like, and you get negative comments, it's like, hey, move along.
Yeah.
If it's not for you, then go, just move along. But for the people that it's for, that's who I'm posting it for. That's what I'm writing it for, to
Totally.
stimulate conversation and a different perspective. So all I try to do is stimulate a different perspective. How could we look at this different? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. Just so if anybody's unfamiliar with the like the Billy story, I imagine they're gathering, you know, from the way we're riffing about it. It's very similar to it's okay. So this is my interpretation of my Billy was like, it's definitely my, like, it's like my dad. And it's funny that you mentioned your relationship with your dad. My dad's name Bill, you know, so when I heard Billy's story, I'm like, ah, that resonates, you know. And it's very much and it's, you know, my dad is no longer with us, and I have a great relationship with him now. I had a fairly up and down relationship with him, especially in my adult life. And so it's the voice, that the inner dialogue voice that I have in my head that wants things done yesterday, you know, like the kind of the evil inner boss a little bit, right? That's like, everything's urgent, you know, everything's at a 10 out of 10. There's derogatory self-talk involved, very opportunistic. The Billy voice will be like, if everything's going well, mysteriously doesn't say anything, but as soon as something goes off the rails a little bit, Billy is there to be like, I knew that was going to happen. You know what I mean? Dog piling on me. You're not good at this. You should have been improving at this, yada, yada. That is Billy. So that was my interpretation of it anyways. And I'll tell you, the whole typing it up, I thought I just nailed it, right? I'm like, oh, I was like feeling good about it. I was laughing about it. I went and read it to my wife and I started crying. So that tells you the impact of like typing it up and then reading it out loud, the different energies. And she's like, you don't see yourself like that, do you? And I'm like, I think I do, actually. Like, there's some work to be done here, right? So what is yeah, just a little bit about like your Billy and like the imposter syndrome and such, if you want to riff on that a little bit.
Well, it's interesting they call it the little Billy story, because I was insulted right away. I'm like, why does it have to be little Billy? Why are these jokes always about little Billy as a joke, right? I'm like,
Right. Yeah.
so I left it. I didn't rename it. Lots of people rename it the Punisher, Duke, whatever they want to call it, right?
Totally. Yeah.
As I do story work with men and some women as well. It's that little Billy was little Billy to me. And that voice represented to me the one that said, why are you even trying? You're not educated. You don't even have a high school diploma.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never get that job. Don't even apply.
Mm.
You know, and then as we get further down, and if you keep listening to little Billy, you know, you're going to end up being a nobody and nothing, right?
Yeah.
Who's going to love a guy like you? You don't even deserve love. Look at you. However, on the exterior, as we compare our insides to other people's outsides, we think, soft talking knowledge, that they don't have that voice. Everybody's got it. I have not worked with one client that did not have that voice. Sometimes that voice is a voice of positivity, which is interesting, because I've given the direction to have them write the story and they come back and it's a positive voice. I'm like, whoa, you are blessed. That wasn't the voice I was asking you to talk about.
Right.
However, it is the version of the roommate. We all have that voice.
Mm-hmm.
You, it's your father.
Mm-hmm.
Me, it's this thing that tells me I'm not good enough. And when you break it down and do the work and slow it down, I cried
Mm-hmm.
and then I laughed,
Yeah. Right.
because how could I believe? How could I have ever listened to such a thing? Because it's a lie.
Right.
When you break it down, go from a nightmare,
Mm-hmm.
comedy, give yourself some space and some clarity. It's
Mm-hmm.
a joke, especially the way we do it. So
Yeah.
even with my clients, I'm like, now I want you to read this and put some up talk, like, little Billy tells me I'm not good enough. Are you kidding me? And add these things. And now people are laughing about the voice. And I'll text them a couple of days later and go, hey, how's your little Billy doing? Oh, man, we're having fun. We're having a good time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they became aware. So that was my little Billy. And
Yeah.
ever since that happened, wow. And then we reverse it in level 2 with your,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? How
That's
awesome,
right.
right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know, it's this whole idea of like in self-development of like, there was a while that I really resented, you know, my ego or my Billy story, or just pockets of like who I am and my inner dialogue. And I was just like, man, if I could just find a meditation or a plant medicine or something that would just, you know, you hear about ego death and such. Now realizing it's, you know, a part of me. And it's just like what you're talking about, getting some space and some humor involved in it. All of a sudden I have a working relationship with it. And there isn't this like, you know what I mean, resistance. We're all part of the same group now. We understand. It's like a family dynamic. You know what I mean? I understand that I can push buttons of my ego, like the part of me that's my ego, vice versa. And there's this collective understanding, and there's a lot more humor to it now. You know what I mean? So yeah, just like I was just thinking about that when you were sort of describing your way of flipping it with yourself and with your clients and such. So really cool, really cool. Last question I want to get into, well, like a couple final topics, but the last question for you is holistic lifestyle coach. That's what you're doing now. What does that mean to you? How is that showing up for you and your clients, and just the relationship that you have with them?
So when we think of a person, because even holistic back in the day to me would be what woo-woo version. No, it just means the whole person. So we all sleep, we all eat, we all move, and we all think. Oh, well, those four buckets, obviously we breathe too. We can add some stuff to that. How well are you doing all those things? Because if you ain't eating right, you ain't moving right. If you ain't moving right, you ain't sleeping right. If you ain't thinking right, you ain't going to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody comes to me, I've literally had people come to me for just physical fitness training because I've made a huge transformation in my life from 2011 to now. They think they want abs. They think they want to lose weight. But if your mind is telling you you're worthless, you'll never show up, why even start? I just start working on the mindset piece. I don't give them even a workout. I've had people lose weight as a result of changing how they think about themselves. It just comes naturally. And then let's get into the other things. So when I talk about holistic lifestyle coaching, it is, how did you start your morning? You meditate? Did you read?
Yeah.
How was your sleeping? Did you get proper sleep, 7 hours, uninterrupted? What was your nighttime routine like? Did you shut off devices a half hour before you went to bed? Do you keep them off a half hour after you wake up? These little things. And when you ask somebody to judge them, those buckets, and they give themselves a low score, man, it's just that awareness. And then all of a sudden they just automatically start making some changes in their life. And then I help provide them with the tools to do it based on my own experience. I'm like my own experiment. I try all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, man. And again, the number 4 comes up there. You mentioned the 4 components that you I've seen some some repetition here, which I love. You know, final thing you mentioned to me before we got started here, you have this physical transformation that you've gone through the last 10 years. And you're really leveraging and capitalizing on that. This upcoming July, I want to say you're doing like 100-mile run. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm doing a 100-mile endurance race on the Tahoe Rim Trail. So it's a
Yeah.
100-mile endurance race. Yeah, you start out running, but by the end, it's really becomes just a it's the David Goggins. It's quieting that inner voice. So you want to talk about little Billy coming out. So
Yeah.
it really begins a battle of not only physical, but mental. And Matt, I'll tell you an emotional story that started that type of journey for me is I lost my mother. I didn't lose my mother. I don't know why we use that term. My mother passed away. She goes where we go, right?
Yeah.
When she was on her deathbed bed, um, I said, "Mom, I'm gonna run your age in miles." And she said, "I knew you would do something crazy like that."
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, I've made this commitment to my mom. How do I do that? So I started searching for, I'd run a 50 miler, which was amazing, but I'd never thought I'm going to run 100. So I set out to train to run a 100-mile foot race once I found one,
Mhm.
and put all the training in and put my toe on the line and began this race. And yeah, 40 miles, I'm beat up. I'm going to climb like 19,000 feet of elevation gain throughout 30 hours. There's a lot of work going to be going in. And I'm at 50 miles and I want to give up. I see other people giving up. I'm like, no, man, I committed to my mom, I'm going to do this. And we talk about soft talk and goal setting. Now, when I reflect, I didn't tell my mom, maybe I'm going to run your age in miles. I'm thinking about it. I
Yeah, yeah.
probably will do it sometimes. I said, I made a commitment that I'm going to do it. So throughout the night, I knew 72, 72, 72. And when I got to 72, I looked up to the sky and I said, Mom, we did it. And it was a very emotional thing.
Yeah.
However, I still had a marathon to go, Matt.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
So
Wow.
I did finish the race. So that has just become a part of my lifestyle. I talk about putting yourself on the hook. You putting yourself out there as creating a men's group is a hook. I'm putting myself on the hook. I'm conducting this. If
Mhm.
I'm telling people I'm going to run 100 miles in July, holy crap, I just put myself on the hook. It's
Mhm.
amazing to do that because it's going to draw me near that goal. How many people live in the safety of their little box, not putting themselves on the hook? I had a buddy tell me, hey, I'm going to quit smoking. I said, did you tell your family and friends? He says, no. I said, you're not going to quit smoking.
Ooh. Yeah,
Why?
yeah.
Because you didn't put yourself on the hook. You
Yeah.
want to quit? You want to do something? Tell everybody you're going to do it. Put it on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Send out a group text because you're not only going to hold yourself accountable, the people that love you are going to hold yourself accountable. So, do I need to run 100 miles?
Yeah.
No, I get to.
Get to. Yeah.
I get to push myself and be an example to men my age. I'm going to be 57 years old in October. That's not old, but I ain't no kid either. And
Right. Right.
I want people to look at me and be an example that, hey, you ain't too old to not only get yourself mentally together, but physically together. How many people do we know our age in sobriety, sitting
Mhm.
at meetings, drinking their coffee, smoking cigarettes at the break? They got the gout, they got the high blood. It's like, man, you're sober now. What, man?
Yeah.
Okay, getting rid of the substances is great. Now,
Yeah.
what are you going to do? I want
Yes.
to talk about what you're going to do now,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely. No, I love that, man. You talk about setting an example. Yeah, absolutely, dude. You set an example. You're an inspiration, to me, just hearing that, I'm 4 years in and now I'm just looking down the road and, I see a light that you set and you're way down there, but I know that you're going to be waiting there for me if and when I get to that stage, you know what I mean? So, definitely set an example. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. And man, congrats on your 35 years sobriety. Congrats on this. I'm congratulating you in advance because I am certain that you are going to run that 100 miles in a couple of months here. And where can people find you online if they want to reach out to you?
So I have an Instagram. My normal Instagram page is SPRTULBIL, just one L. It actually stands for Spiritual Bill.
I
So
thought so. I thought
yeah,
that's what it was. Yeah.
it's
Okay.
a nickname guys have given me throughout the years.
Okay.
And then the other one is the Perspectivest. It's the underscore Perspectivest. If you go to my main page, you'll see the Perspectivest posts.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, if I could be of any service, my goal is to inspire with my actions, encourage with my words, and serve with love. That's what I want to do. It's about us, you, me, shining our light for others. Let's be lighthouses, letting other people know, man, you can get out of the darkness and have a life beyond your wildest dreams. And Matt, I really appreciate the opportunity for you to allow me to participate in the conversation that you are bringing to others, that we're not just this, we can be this.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. And thank you so much for helping me, get that message out there because it's very important to me. That's exactly what you said. Sober. Okay. Now what? And then what you mentioned, yes, there's this protective box or shell that it's like this incubation period of like recovery. And you mentioned, okay, so what is beyond recovery? What are you going to become? And that's the beautiful, frightening, exhilarating, all the above, that comes after that, isn't it?
Absolutely. I could have never imagined the life I have today.
Yeah. Very, very great. Thank you so much, Bill.
Appreciate it, Matt. Thank you, sir.